Today on the Lobster Talks, I'm sitting down with Dakotah Rice, founder of Harper, a fully autonomous commercial insurance brokerage powered by AI. Think about that for a second. They're automating one of the most old school, high trust industries in the world. So today we're going to break down how Harper built their tech, sold their first deals, and what it takes to turn expert workflows into code. So if you've been following YC's request to build AI companies from the ground up, this is the episode. So Dakotah, thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited.
Yeah, of course. Excited. I'm very excited to dive in.
All right, let's start. So I've already introduced a little bit Harper, but introduce yourself and Harper in your own words, please.
For sure. So my name's Dakotah Rice. I'm from Alabama, and I grew up basically in finance. So I worked at Goldman, I was at Carlyle, then I was at Cotu for a while. And Harper is really just a commercial insurance brokerage. That's how I would describe it. We use AI underneath the hood. It makes our insurance brokerage much more efficient than others and helps us help our customers solve more complex insurance problems with the same speed people are used to with more simplified insurance problems. But what I would say at the highest level is we are just a commercial insurance brokerage. We largely service businesses that are in the mid-size, kind of range is what I would say. Usually our sweet spot is something like 10 million or so dollars. And we cover everything from specialty pharmaceutical manufacturers to folks who do missile manufacturing on down to, larger franchises of salad shops in Michigan, as an example. So we do some of everything and we're nationwide.
That's extremely cool. And something that I think is sort of even cooler is you're ahead of your time. And by that, I precisely mean that the latest YC request for startup mentioned exactly this. And I've dissected this in this podcast with previous guests that instead of selling AI tools to insurance brokerage, you're going head to head with them. You're going to compete with them by building from the ground up. But YC said that in the latest request that dropped last month, you started this almost a year ago. So you're a visionary. How did you realize, well, instead of building AI for other, insurance brokerages, we're going to build for ourselves and compete?
Yeah. I wish I could have some grand thing where I said, oh my God, I had this great insight and it kind of led me to all these things. In reality, it was trial and error. We went out and we first thought we might build AI tools for insurance brokers. And so we went and talked to lots of insurance brokers and realized they did not want to buy AI tools. I think the really large ones like the Marshes of the world will likely adopt a lot of this stuff and it'll make a lot of sense. But when you think about insurance brokerages, it's very fragmented. There are over 500,000 of them in the US, and many of them have small books of business, right? So the willingness to pay, the margins also can be very low on insurance brokerages, just given that the sales cycles can sometimes be long. If you think about it, a lot of businesses, you don't know when they're going to renew their insurance. So you go out and you talk to a barbershop, but what if the renewal is not for 6 months? So there's a lot of reasons why structurally I think it's hard. So we went and thought maybe what we should do instead was be a BPO service. So what we actually started to do is say, hey, we'll build AI tools for ourselves.
Define BPO for the audience.
Like business process automation or optimization. Basically, what you do is you go out, they outsource the work. Think about a lot of the work that Accenture does, for example. So what we thought was that, hey, if there are broader trends in insurance, like a talent gap, many people are retiring out, not enough people are coming in. There's a whole broader trend of things that were just kind of going wrong. So we thought if we sell the work, at the time, the name of the day was to sell the work to people instead of becoming the thing. And so we tried to sell the work to folks. And there was a lot of interest in the concept, but the margins on that would be razor thin because people don't want to give up commissions. Insurance brokerages make money off of commissions, and they didn't want to give up enough of the commissions. So it seemed to us that we actually needed to just do the same sales thing we were doing for other people, but for ourselves. And that's where it really came to life. And I would say, honestly, even during and through IC, not until now, when this business is really scaling, do I see exactly why that has to be the case and why I think that's the best model for really, kind of transforming these businesses with AI.
Wow. So it's interesting because it's almost always the same story of trial and error and pivoting. It's always the same one. Did you go to YC already having had those one or two pivots of selling to insurance brokers and then being selling the work and then finally competing head to head, or did that happen during YC?
Yeah. We came to YC with around 100 customers already in this model. servicing a lot of smaller customers. Our average premiums were quite low, our average contract values were pretty low. And then when we got into YC, we sort of refined our focus a lot more. And candidly, I would say started to think a lot bigger about the sort of things we could do. To be more specific, we came in saying, hey, we're going to do insurance. At one point, it was for like tree trimmers. I mean, we were very specific. We took the like be super specific thing to heart. And I think over time, where we started to see much more success was when we broadened up and thought about what we did more on a line by line of insurance type basis. So you could take the approach of saying, hey, I'm going to cover, let's call it clothing companies. And then you can do everything for clothing companies, understand them in and out. You could also say, hey, look, I'll do general liability and professional liability insurance and know that like the back of your hand and do it across many parties. And so that's more of the approach that we ultimately discovered during YC. But we were pretty convinced by that point that we needed to do the work ourselves. What we did not have was a lot of tools. So Tashar and I had started a business before that didn't do so well. And what we saw was in that business is that, sometimes you build the things and they will come. And these are all like, people who watch these YC things will see this and think about it as another cliche, but like it kind of is something that I viscerally feel. So that advice is like so not a cliche and like is so well founded. We would make these things and we kind of talk to users, but then we kind of put the thing out and then you didn't really know. And then you would just be in your head about how great it was going to be. And then it was a waste of time. And so what we said is like, let's make a real business. We kind of sat at my kitchen table and made a business with pencil and paper. Literally, had a file
Wow.
cabinet. Let's make a real basic, boring business. Let's make a business that makes money. And then let's transform that business once we understand all of its problems. Then we hire people. Then we build the things. And so that phase also kind of launched off during YC as well.
That's very cool. There's several things that I want to double down on. But first, I have a note from my team to remind listeners to hit the subscribe button if you're not yet subscribed. Leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform if you're listening there. Thank you. Okay, build it and they will come. You said that. I want to double down. I mostly 99% don't believe that's true. And I also believe sometimes the product is so beautiful and the need is so visceral. I've seen it work, but 99% of the time I don't believe that's true. How do you sit on that line?
Yeah, I think it's very fair. In some ways you sit on 99, and some ways you sit on 1. Insurance is a particular type of thing because most businesses need their insurance. Like the government requires it, their customers require a certificate of insurance, their landlord even requires it. Like when we got our office, they made sure we had workers' comp and this is like, so there are reasons why businesses have to have insurance. And so I think it's not one of those things like building an insurance agency is not the most revolutionary idea in the world. People need insurance every day, a lot of people. So they go find insurance. So in some ways, I was not de-risked, but kind of de-risked in the they will come part. Because if I have the
That's
things
true.
that people need and every day they do it, like they will come. I think that like I think people say this in different ways and mean different things. I'll say what it means to me, like why that is a bad idea or how I thought about it for us. If I don't actually know what makes insurance brokerages more efficient because I've never had a customer and then I've never had 15 customers and then I've never had 100 customers, I don't know what it looks like when they have the insurance. What happens afterwards? How are renewals? What are the referral channels? What are service requests that come from them? What if they have complex needs? How do I get them another policy? At first I was doing this, but I don't know how to do commercial auto. So there were a lot of things I didn't know. And so conceptually, I thought I could build, and this is very different than consumer products or other things. So I think different people will have different approaches. I'll just talk about for our business and insurance. You can't predict the workflows until you actually do the workflows. So you have to do the workflows to figure out what you build, or else you're building a product that's like a theory of a thing. Like one of the first thoughts we had, let's build this COI generator, which is a basic important part, generates a certificate of insurance. But you might end up building all these mini products to do these specific discrete tasks, but not think about the whole workflow of like what it, so I think basically what we found is if you really want to build this in agentic way, you have to actually start with first principles, take different pieces of that puzzle out, but think with the workflow in mind instead of making a bunch of disjointed random products, which I think happens a lot with AI companies selling software in general, because you go to customers and they want this, and this one wants this, and this one wants this, and this one, it's kind of like until you can see the full workflow and own the data candidly and own the workflow and own the practitioners, I think it's really difficult to bring that vision into reality.
That's fascinating, and it sparks a question. It just came to me. I didn't prepare this one, but the rest I
Yeah.
prepare a little bit of the show, right? But this one I didn't prepare. But there's so many companies in YC and in the world, and I think it's fascinating, and I think you're part of that. That have sort of a big bold promise like, hey, we'll do an AI first brokerage interest. But of course, at the beginning, you're doing some things manually because you have to know, like exactly like you explained, you have to learn the workflow, what's needed to. And so my question is twofold, or three questions is, how do you split your time between being automated and then, sorry, doing it manually, but then saying, okay, now we need to automate this, but then you have the backlog of customers? And how do you make that, how do you go about that process? How do you think about that process? Because in the end, you want to automate everything, but you can't do it too quickly, otherwise it's going to break. What are you
Yeah.
looking for? What patterns? How does all of this work for you, at least?
Yeah. I start off with a lot of just very first principles. Like I don't go in guns a-blazing, like I need to automate everything that's a part of this. It's something that I want to do, but I also understand very well you have to have this duality as a founder. Like, you think big and small. Um, I would say that for us, the way that it works is engineers are very firmly embedded into actual like other business teams. So there's like a person on our engineering team or people that sit with the sales team. And so they actually do work with the sales team too. So for example, like they'll submit things to underwriters. You can't build like a memory system for an agent that's going to be able to know exactly who to send things to if you don't understand intricacies. Like when we have 1,000 customers come in a week, we actually have to send some to this person, some to this person, and they have different specialties and they have different turnaround times. So how do you build algorithms for things like factoring in throughput and all of these other dynamics if you don't actually sit there and do the work? Everybody who works at Harper, engineer, non-engineer, they sit and do the first core thing that me and Tashar did every day around my dinner table or my kitchen table. We pick up a phone, customers call in, we pick up the phone, we walk them through an application, we write everything that everybody has to have an insurance license because everybody kind of needs to understand insurance and be a little bit with it if you're an engineer, if you're not. And so by really putting everybody into those workflows, they understand the critical parts of the workflow that drive product adoption too. Because another big thing about driving product adoption is putting something in the critical path. Is kind of how we like to think about it a lot. So by knowing that critical path, by knowing every step of it, you're able to make something that's more useful. So what I'll say is that like put people there until it can be automated. Don't rush the automation and mess something up. But I'll also say that like our business growth has forced us to think of those things. Every week we're adding like 100 new customers to our
Wow,
business. And we only had 100 customers 2 months ago. So,
that's very cool. Congrats.
yes. So it's thank you. But so with that kind of scaling factor, you also have to like be practical too, because people are calling your phone. We have more people that call us wanting insurance every single day, even with adding 100 customers, than we can actually service. So at that point, also, I would say automation becomes something that's not just a nice to have. You actually like it has to happen. So it kind of like everything's always bursting at the seams. We have to build products to solve real problems, but we're having the problem actively. And so leverage people in the meantime, but like you're actively building it because you can't satiate all the demand for the product without building more of the automation.
Yeah, it's a forcing function. You don't have a choice because you have too much demand. And also, what you said is very interesting. It's like working the floor at McDonald's. You cook the fries, you go do the cashier, and then you can go up into management. But you have to be the fries guy for a week, for a month, before you can do anything else. And that's embedded in so many big, big, big companies throughout the US and the world. Big, big, big successes. And hopefully, you keep that. Even if when you have 1,000 employees, which maybe you never get to 1,000 because you have AI, but if you do, everyone starts at this level. That's awesome.
Really great.
You touched on earlier, you had a previous company that did not do well. Could you take us back a little bit on sort of how you got here, the genesis, what you did before? I believe with the same co-founder. I don't know how, you don't have to get into too many details because that's not the point of the show, but how did that failure shape this? Harper is now absolutely killing it, and so we're very happy for that. What's the sort of founder story behind all of that story, all of that?
Yeah. I never thought I would be a founder. I also never thought I would work at a hedge fund or a private equity fund. So that's interesting. That's kind of how my life is, like this series of things that just kind of happen.
You'll end up
Um,
on Mars with Elon Musk because you never thought you'd do that, and you will.
never thought yeah. So basically, like I grew up pretty poor in Alabama, and I started working these jobs where I made more money, and I started to realize, oh my God, I'm having access to investments other people don't have access to. This is crazy, And at the time of zero interest rates, it was really people losing out by not being able to be in some of these like even private equity deals that liquidated pretty quickly. And so I said to myself, well, maybe I can make it so that people could invest for as little as $1. That was the thought. And I thought at least at a minimum, there were a bunch of young Wall Street types that wanted to invest in KKR. And so maybe I would be able to get those folks on the platform. So I left Code 2. I went to Harvard Business School so that I could focus on building a company. And that's kind of what I did. And I did it with Tushar. And that was the whole vision and mission of it. We actually were able to do it. It was a lot more. It was one of those things that also a lot of times things feel like a tech company, but they're really like not a tech company. They're something else, but it just disguises a tech company. I think with Harper, interestingly, like if we didn't do the AI, it would just be an insurance company. Like it's kind of just is what it is. For this one, it was like, it was just an investment firm. We did a lot of legal work, a lot of complex things like Code 2's new tender offer fund. That's exactly the approach that we took in 2021. And we did 2 of them as a startup, very, very, very expensive. But we did get traction. We had like 10,000 folks come in, about $100 million of AUM that got committed. But lessons that I learned were things like actually pulling somebody's intention to being from a commitment to actual transferring the money. Hard. Trying to go the route of getting a bunch of small things instead of taking the route of, hey, let's go to family offices or something, makes it way longer of a trudge for you to be able to get all of that stuff together. I also learned really other important lessons. I went out there and said to myself, I want to be the next Fidelity. I want to be the next BlackRock. Great vision. But I think in reality, in some spaces, it's smart to align yourself with the interest of larger parties. All of the great success stories in alternative investments were like aligned with Goldman Sachs, aligned with Blackstone, aligned with Fidelity. And so interestingly, in terms of how I kind of take some of those lessons here for Harper, and I'll talk about the transition points, but there are a lot of beneficiaries of us being able to centralize volume and make it massive. Everybody on the supply side of this market would love to go to one source instead of 500,000 sources and find all that they need with this one party. They are willing to operate with that party. They'll come to your offices, which they even do now. They come to our offices. They adapt processes to fit where we are in the chain because carriers can't own direct to client relationships, right? Not at scale. They focus on underwriting and they focus on doing that very well. They depend on agents to go do all the rest of those things. And so I took that core lesson of, I don't want to replace these people. There's a great symbiotic relationship in some of these spaces where if your interests align, they pour into you. And so what I kind of unlocked with Harper is exactly that. Our partners love us. Carriers love us because if we can do this amazing thing of aggregating demand and make our customers happy, we also make them very happy. And so that's kind of where that comes from. As far as the actual idea for Harper, we thought about multiple places. We were, the generation of the AI SDR was running all around. And so we said to ourselves, it seems like these early success cases with AI commercially do tend to be sales oriented because there's also a clear revenue outcome. Let's see where we might do it. We thought about so many things, if I'm really honest with you. We thought about being an executive assistant. I even would apply to jobs as an executive assistant or various other things I saw a lot of and go do the interviews and say, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this thing with AI. I thought of so many different ways that we might do it. In fact, what actually happened was that we saw so many job openings for insurance agents. They were everywhere. And when we would apply to the jobs on Indeed, we would get responses back within hours, and we would have hundreds of interviews some days.
Wow.
And so we thought at first we'll do BPO for them because they have the sales problem. But then, I told you more about how we morphed over to realizing we need to do it ourselves. But it was kind of this very organic kind of thing. I do have a family background in insurance. I talk about that a lot. I kind of wanted to stay out of that. They were doing mostly personal lines. I don't have a lot of family that was sitting around writing pharmaceutical manufacturers or anything like that. But it's all a story of happening and circumstance and using first principles of like, what do people need and testing that people actually needed and testing how you deliver it. That's really all, the way that Harper came about.
That's very cool. That's a very, very cool story and all the lessons you bring with you. I was trying to put together a question. I don't know if it's the easiest question to ask, but basically I said earlier, jokingly, half jokingly, that you're a visionary because you realized before everyone else that you could build AI vertical first, vertically integrated AI first companies to compete head to head. And so my question was around when you realized that AI can actually go full circle and do everything. So that's what you just talked about right now. You realize at some point we can do everything. My question to you is, and probably I'm guessing you saw that because you're saying, oh, AI is advancing so quickly. Maybe if it's not right there yet, everything, it's going to be there in a couple of months, in a couple of years. Yeah. And so today, everyone knows you can do vertically integrated AI first, but what's the next step? What are people not seeing now with the advances of AI that 1, 2, 3 years from today will say, oh, AI can do this as well. I can build this type of company, or I can replace this type of process. Do you have an opinion on that?
I think that AI can really do everybody's job well, to be honest. I mean, people think about it today as like more engineering or something that's more deterministic. I think it could do a lot. It does a lot of great reasoning. I mean, we have these systems, like we don't have to use platforms like Asana or like a HubSpot because we build all this stuff ourselves. I mean, it listens to everything and it flags like this customer needs this. I mean, it's really with it. It predicts the next steps very well. And I think when it's built on your data and all of these, loops of, at this point, we've talked to over 6,000 customers and, we've had failures and successes, but it can understand the whole range of those because it's kind of fed into everything. I think that maybe I'll put it like this. This is what I think people get wrong. I think that most people, at least Silicon Valley types, believe AI can probably eventually do everything. I think most people would say like at some point in 10 years, like I think everybody can kind of agree with that. I think the path to that is what people have really mistaken a lot. If you look at Klarna, for example, rolling back that we're going to use AI agents for everything, and they would replace like over 90% of their staff. Now they're calling them all back, right? I think that there's a
It's
fine
crazy.
balance. I think people who are really with it with AI realize there are some real limitations to these systems today. They're getting there, and the model capacity is advancing a lot. But how you even get these systems, different agents to interact with one another, them understanding really wide-ranging, complex workflows. The real workflow in insurance is all the way from you talk to the person the first time through, you've sent it to 5 or 6 different underwriters. They have like maybe 50 questions among them. You have to fill out like 5 or 6 different applications for each one. There's a lot of many steps involved in everything. And there's a lot of different logic paths in the applications. There's a lot of stuff. So I think we always do this. We think with the big thing, but we do each little thing well first. And the basis and the infrastructure to support the memory that's required for these systems to do all of this stuff, it's no non-trivial task. It's very, very hard task. So I think that, sure, cool applications that you click and it does something with your email. Okay, yes, that's fantastic. I think that for the big thing, real full workflow automations and truly being able to not just do 70%, like really 100% do even hard jobs, the infrastructure is critical. Setting up the memory is critical. How you do agent architecture is critical. You will there's a lot of things to get wrong before you get right. And in order to get all the data, processing that data, people think a lot about, I'm going to hire applied AI engineer. You need data engineers and data scientists. Like that's another huge part of actually making all of this stuff work. So I think the models are more and more capable of doing stuff. I think how you build infrastructure to help them actually execute all the stuff is where people miss a lot. And I can always tell somebody who's really building complex AI systems versus people who are kind of handling at the application layer. There's a lot, it's different in the research layer. And when you're building more of the dev tools, that's a little bit different. But when you're talking about like, I'm going to build a business that's going to have 10 people, I mean, good luck. I think that's basically what I would say. I believe that there's some version of that exists in the world if you're building a software product and you can use Cursor and some other things to build this thing. But when you're going to do something that's like a service business, good luck. I think it's going to be a fraction of the size of Marsh, and that your path to get there will feel Cursor-like. Cursor's, that kind of ascension curve is crazy for software. I think there's a different, longer one, but people will be looking like places like Harper and say, oh my God, that was amazing for this vertical. But I would say don't, and Tom, our partner at YC, was very, very good about drilling this into our heads. He's an amazing partner. He was like, hey, you really want to be careful and make sure that while you need to have humans, you put them there because you want to make sure people still get great service quality. You want to make sure underwriters still trust you. If I'm sending things out with AI and then I'm sending them the wrong stuff all the time, they're not going to take me seriously. They won't show up at our offices like they do now, smiling and talking to us about all of our volume. So there's some of these things where it's like, you want to do it and you have to have a workforce that's okay with experimentation. So what I will say is like, I sit there and I know things that we're building are not working and still use them. I mean, it takes more time to do and get them right, but I think it's more of like when you own the end to end, you're able to get people to adopt things even if they're not fully working, but there's a human to refine and make sure it ultimately does work. But you're going to need humans in the loop for a while to get to that kind of level that we're talking about.
It's awesome. I love this deep dive, and the way the way you talk about this is pretty awesome. It got me wondering, it's not for today, but just is VC getting automated with AI as well? I don't know. Let's have another episode. Walk me through sort of the very first few customers. How did you convince them to actually trust, AI for their insurance? Or did you say, oh, it's just lightly AI and mostly human behind it? What happened with the very first few customers?
I still don't talk to my customers about AI at all. There's no concept of AI. It's not important to them. Like it's like one of those things where it's like, imagine you build this great software and you go to your customer, like maybe they're the CFO of the firm, and you start getting in the weeds of, well, you built this great architecture and it has this and there's the AI. They just don't care. All they care about is the outcome. So our customers don't think about or care about the AI practically because they're just getting their insurance policy. I think that what they do care about as a result of the AI are traditional things they care about from insurance brokerages, but that insurance brokerages fail to be able to do because they don't use AI. So, for example, they care about getting cheaper policies. Well, if you run a competitive process with underwriters, we get cheaper policies. We can do that because we use AI to help us run these, competitive processes. They care about the speed of delivery. We're able to do things fast because we use AI. So I don't need to tell them. I tell them the value they get, right? I talk about what matters to them. But in reality, what's happening underneath the hood that gets them that value faster and better is the AI. But I don't really talk about it much. I think that people are a mixed bag, and we work with a lot of real world businesses. This is what I like to talk about. Real world. Towing companies, roadside assistance companies, manufacturing companies, middle America, salt of the earth, real, regular, degular, schmegular businesses is how I like to think about it, right? They do not want to hear about that. It's not like top of mind for them. They want to care about their getting things, the way that they want them. So I do think that there is an emerging customer archetype that we do see. Namely, it's like a lot of companies, maybe they exit YC and they get their first couple enterprise customers and they find out their, cyber insurance has an AI exclusion or something like that, which we help with that kind of stuff. And so for those folks, I think they like to hear that we're using AI and that we're doing things better and faster with using this technology. But for a lot of our customer base, regular middle of the earth kind of businesses, they just want to get their insurance as fast and cheaply as possible and get really serviced well by their insurance brokerage.
It's very interesting because I was checking your website while you're giving me that answer, and I was like, but don't they see on your website, oh, Harper, we're the AI first insurance broker, and your website doesn't mention that at all. It's so you're right, they don't care. Your website is customer facing. Now I'm thinking to myself, is that going to be a disadvantage for you for investors? Well, of course, if you have the great numbers, they don't care. But an investor who might check you out, they're thinking, oh, this is not an AI company at all. It's just an insurance brokerage. I'll move on to the next. So have you thought of that, or does that not matter?
I never sit around, and this is the best advice, any founder watching this, I never sit around ever in my day and think to myself, oh my God, is somebody going to invest in me? Because I literally, if the moment anybody
You never
talks
think about me, Dakota. I'm so sad.
I love you guys. I send you the updates. But when I have people go around and if somebody says the word VC, I say stop. We don't have a culture about talking about VCs. We don't have a culture about talking about next rounds. Rounds are not milestones. Work is milestones. What are we doing? So I've never thought about that. Okay. But I will say, like, we get reached out to by great investors and have great investors on our cap table today all the time. I think really with it, people, there's this expression that reals recognize real, like that's kind of concept. It's like people who really know what's going on understand, like, there's more nuance than flash,
Very cool. Very cool. But you're right. And Michael Seibel says it all the time. And everyone always says you should optimize for customers. You should never optimize for VC. So, how sad that makes me, but that's the truth. You should not care about VCs, because if you build a great business, the VCs are going to come, and your website reflects that.
Yeah.
What's your biggest bottleneck to scaling today, and how are you solving it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our biggest bottleneck to scaling today is really operational observability and orchestration. So, like, what does that actually mean? Every day, through a number of sources, basically, we could be processing thousands of calls. Thousands of people in insurance is primarily calls. People call in and they want to, you go through an application with them for 15 or so minutes, and that's kind of how the process kicks off. Ultimately, I think voice AI and some people are fine with talking to automated systems, even if it doesn't sound hyper realistic. So I really do think that you could probably solve some of that portion of it. Even though I don't focus as much on that today. But let's say we can increase our capacity using labor or wage arbitrage, something like that, basically to get to those thousands of calls. The issue that we sort of run into as we scale to even hundreds of calls a day is that the observability. What happened on all those calls? Did the applications that people, because you start to get more of like an intake team, it's just a little bit different than the team that sits here in SF. How do you make sure that you quality control those applications across so many different types of customers? When customers call back in, how are you tracking that some people are more hot than cold when you have hundreds of these customers that are there? How do you track what you've sent to different underwriters when you start to send, in a week, 1,000 plus submissions to underwriters, and they're all people, and you're submitting them sometimes, to 3 and 4 underwriters. So that's 3,000 or 4,000 emails in memory, and trying to track those kinds of comms with people. How do you make sure that when certain ones ask questions back, that you're able to follow up with that kind of scaling factor that's happening. I think that there's a lot of, we're blessed, and I'll never take it for granted, because I've seen the opposite side of this, that there's a bunch of demand for the stuff that we're doing. But how do you actually track and throughput and orchestrate all of that demand? What you have to do is make it more like an assembly line. When we first started, what happened was the person who took the call, same person who does the underwriter follow-up, same person. It's like one broker does the full thing. Now, in order to be able to process hundreds of calls a day, we have the intake team. They intake people. We started off just using Slack, because that's how I'm used to, like, using Slack and fast. We didn't even have a file system. It was all like, we had like 1,000 customers. So, it's just kind of like, you just don't, things just kind of grew random. So a lot of what we focus on today in the bottleneck is like, we have to get the infrastructure right, because we kind of grew quickly, and the infrastructure to be able to take in thousands of these things in a week and be able to send them to all these people and see where they are. We have so many drop deals because of lack of observability, right? Because we just don't know that somebody requested a follow-up. Or, it's even hard sometimes to be able to do a system that can, understand, hey, you sent this out, this, because you're not sending it from a submission platform, you're doing it from email and all these different sources. It's really unstructured data. This is the promise of AI, and why every day I get like so excited about what we're doing, because you just have all this stuff in disparate places. It's be one thing if everything was done through one email channel or like one thing, but because it's text messages, customers call in to individual people's lines and to the customer line. We have over 50 lines on our phone line, right? We have everybody has there's 20 different emails. There's just so many different things. So getting all of that orchestrated is the biggest bottleneck that I would say that we kind of have today. And once we do that, we can take in a lot more from different sources. Like, one of the reasons why I don't do a ton of outbound today, everything's coming in with people calling in, is because I don't have control of the motion right now. Like, if I have all these people come in and there's already 1,000 things in a week, well, what if it becomes 3,000 things? Like, it's so unstructured, because each customer, different applications, different follow-ups from underwriters. It's largely because the supply side is not automated. Like, for regular insurance, like if you just want to get a barbershop or something, you can go click, 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 and boom, the insurance is there. When you start talking about the sort of businesses that we work with, 20 trucks in a trucking fleet carrying hazardous materials, manufacturing companies, wholesale importing of alcohol from Japan, for sake from Japan, we did one like this. And this is just not the same thing. So it's definitely the ability to do that across all of that unstructured user flows, workflows, data flows. That's the big challenge today.
It's usually a good sign, where I believe it is, when a company is sort of struggling to keep up with its own growth, with its own organic growth. You're thinking, it seems there's something happening there. It's just a perpetual, almost falling forward. Uh, let's
Yeah, I
hope.
love that. I love that expression. I'm going to start telling people that today. I'm going to start, because I'm like, that's a great way to describe that.
Yeah,
Like, I'm
let's just
actually
hope
going
you
to
don't
start.
trip, right? You just need to trip and keep running. But that's what you're doing. And by the way, like, that's how satellites orbit the Earth. It's, they're falling, but they're going so quickly that they actually fall forward instead of falling back on Earth. Interesting concept. I've done a lot of shows here with space tech founders from YC, but that's not the case here.
I love that.
Very, very different. You mentioned, on this very topic, and you also said earlier, there's like 500 or 5,000, I think, insurance brokers in the US. And so they sort of all know each other. There's a lot of tacit knowledge and relationship and habits that people have. And you're trying to move this from humans to, bits and, on the computer with AI. So how do you codify that? How do you compensate for that to make sure that, the system still works and have all of those tacit knowledge in your AI systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things is making sure the engineers are doing the work too, so that they actually understand like how to encode this. It's not just like a surface level, like I'm in a consulting firm and come in and we're sitting on two sides. It's really integrated, so they can understand the nuances of how you kind of navigate even things like relationships. Like, we can put in our algorithms, we need to send more to X person because of the relationship, they give us more commission, or because of the relationship, blah, blah, blah. So that is very, very, very important. I would say that, like, other things that you do is that you have to make sure, the same way we make sure engineers are embedded in the business side, that everybody who works here has to actually already be an adopter of AI in their regular lives. Like, there's no question. Like, the first thing we ask people, have you run it through Claude? Have you run it through Claude yet? Have you done this? So everybody here really, really, really understands the technical side too. We also sit in on the engineering pieces, not just like the high level, let's have a product conversation, but even if people don't fully understand, like when Tashara's writing things, we have boards on all of these walls, like in our office and like on the doors, and they're just full of like architect, like we're gonna make this agent do this, and the memory is this, and so it's just like we all sit in and everybody has a basic understanding. It's sort of like before how people say business development folks need to be able to do SQL so they can pull things from the database. It's very much similar to that. Like people have to be able to leverage the tools, even the off the shelf ones to be able. So what it just results in is like more cross collaboration. We speak a common language. There's not two different languages. Like I can go talk to an engineer and I'll be like, well, you have this part in the data structure and this part. So I think you could probably combine this in the algorithms. Like everybody has to speak that same language. So it's really just a different type of workforce as well, is what I would say. But that's kind of how we do it. And there are 500,000 of these insurance brokerages. Those are the people we mostly compete against. You're right. There's like not many, there's only a few thousands of carriers. So that side of the marketplace and the relationships and stuff really matter, which is also why my job as a CEO is not just the product or just talking to the customer. Like it's also a whole partnership and supply side dynamic that's very important. And I learned a lot about that back in my former company as well. But yeah, that's super important.
Moving on to sort of broader market and pattern recognition, is there patterns that you're seeing with insurance, and you're seeing other places that show you which industries are AI ready or AI disruptable?
Yeah. Honestly, I think that people have a good sense that more deterministic, when I say that I mean like code or something where there's like a clear outcome, that those places are AI disruptible, and currently have a mentality. I think that things that require a lot more intuition or just things the AI systems won't be able to do. I really push back on that. I think that that's where you can make. I think that the services element and how much AI can disrupt services is not fully appreciated, because I think until you sit there and see the value of like, when you just take Claude or something off the shelf, sure, and you ask it nuanced questions, there are some things. But when you're tuning these models and you kind of have them like inside of a broader architecture and they have access to all of these, I think last month we did, maybe there were over 500,000 events happened, over the last month in our systems. Those things really, and if you have the right people who are kind of doing and instructing and everything, they can get really close on the intuition. I'm kind of surprised every day when we do things like AI predicts the action and then the human says the action next to it, and like there's always a reconciliation of those things. I'm surprised how accurate the AI is about what should continue to happen. And of course, then the next step of that is you make it do the action, but you want to start by like making sure the actions are right. So we do that at scale across all of the thousand, whatever, we have like close to 1,000 interactions in a week now with customers or potential customers. It's observing everything and predicting next actions, and it's really, really accurate. So I just think that people may be a little bit off about the places and spaces in which AI can do a ton of automation and the level that it can go up to. I kind of believe AI is like the replacement of the middle manager, is my hot take. I think that like when you have a business like ours, when I think about how a Marsh gets to 90,000 employees, it's so easy because it's just orchestrating. Like it's like there's so many people that at some point you can't have observability even with the basic CRM. You have to orchestrate. So you have this huge middle management layer. I think people think a lot about low level, low skill jobs or whatever that can be taken with AI, or like the simple junior coder job. But I think there's a lot of things up until like VP level, and think about like a bank or something, VP being mid level, like a bunch up to VP level. There's a lot that you could really take away, and I think people might underestimate that.
So you might end up with just a few C-level founders, etc., and then a bunch of like bottom level customer facing people
Honestly,
that
I think
and
yes.
that's it. No middle management.
I think I could really see that.
No, very cool. Okay, let's move on to future bets and bold predictions, where I ask you a question about the future and you tell me what you think. Feel free to
Okay.
go crazy here. So the first one is, do you think there's fully autonomous AI firms coming? If so, how soon do they become the major player in the industry, and which industries are going to be disrupted first?
I'll talk about lease insurance. No, I don't believe it. Like I'm not. I don't believe fully autonomous AI. Like it's just AI doing it, and there's like 5 people there with code. I don't believe it. I think that if anything, maybe it can do, even if it did all of the tasks with the customers, which I do believe it can do. there is a partnership and realistic lens that you have to put over the supply side of some of these industries. I think finances will be hard. Alternative investment, like there's a bunch of these industries where it's like there's so much capital and so much raw amount of money, even with the margins, that people value relationships. Like, for example, imagine if you're going to have your firm and then you're going to have, like, I don't know, like the GIC or something invested in you. It's like, even if all your investments could be automated, GIC is going to want to talk to somebody at your firm, and you're going to have to know what's up, right? And there might be a number of people that might have to know what's up because they're still going to have their legacy processes. What I would say is, like, you can only control, maybe I'll say this differently. You can control what you can control. We could probably build a fully AI autonomous brokerage that talk to all of our customers and everything we're doing at scale. But there's always going to be a legacy in the industries I know, regulated finance, that kind of it. There's always these more deeply entrenched supply side kind of players whose businesses will transform, but will never transform to your one person with AI business. And so because of that, you will always have to have deeper complexity. Also, regulators are going to crack down on this for sure. I'm convinced. It's like this isn't regulated state by state. They're going to have regulations in different insurance. They're going to have different regulations around where AI can play in different states. I guarantee you, California will not look like Georgia, will not look like Texas. So the techno optimist side of me is absolutely like conceptually sure. I think Anthropic and OpenAI will make amazing models, and theoretically yes, and then it would be democratized with how you train them. But there's a reality to business building that I think sometimes people can get lost in regulated industries, especially, is what I'll say. It may be different in software companies. I'm talking about what I'm doing. I don't think so.
Interesting. I probably agree, but let's see how this plays out. Come back for our next episode. What's one widely accepted idea in insurtech that you think is wrong?
I think people think that relationships matter more than transactions and transactional volume. I think that the core person will come in and say, oh my God, your relationship with XYZ carrier, that's what matters, that you go to coffee, that you do this, that you talk to them every week. I think honestly, the only thing that matters is that you're pumping a bunch of volume and that it's quality. And for your customers, they do want a good relationship with you, but honestly, they really just want the thing that they need. So I think people just think relationships are more valuable than they are, candidly. That's my hot take.
Very cool. What happens to traditional brokerages over the next decade?
I think that they will probably have to adopt some AI tools, and so great companies like some that were in our batch will benefit from that. I think that the workforce will struggle with AI adoption. So I think that a lot of them will perish, or a lot of their customers will go elsewhere, because you'll just be able to get everything for simple reasons. They'll be able to get their things faster, better, cheaper. like who doesn't want that? And so you'll kind of fall behind. And using these tools is complex. It's like using Clay is not easy, as an example. I mean, just think about some of the stuff we're talking. Even using Claude the right way is not that easy. How you prompt things the right way. You can't just throw thousands of tabs in a CSV. I mean, you have to be slightest bit technical to fully use these systems. And so I just think a lot of people will struggle with it. I think that a lot of them will go away.
Okay. And so where's Harper in 5 years from now?
5 years. I believe that within the next 5 years, Harper will show that fragmentation is not a must-have in insurance and insurance brokerage, and we will redefine the market structure such that you can see internet-like market structure. So what does that mean? The same way that like the internet is dominated by a few players that have really high concentration, even Snapchat, Facebook, Google, whatever, I think you'll start to see the same thing here. And from my perspective, Harper should be, the leader of that. Ideally, it would be something to the tune of like a third of the market. More realistically, at least 10, 20% of the market. I think we could show that we insure 10 to 20% of businesses in America within the next 5 years.
Let's hope you're right. Okay, that concludes our segment and our discussion today. Thank you so very much. Where can businesses go to apply? So it's harperinsurance.com, I think. Where can people learn more?
Yeah, people can go to Harper Insure. That's just HARPERINSURE.com to learn more and reach out to us if they need help with anything.
And where can people follow you? What's the best? Is it Twitter, LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn. My name is Dakotah Rice, so you could just follow me. And then Harper is just Harper, and you'll see Harper YCW25 is the LinkedIn handle. You can follow along for our journey there.
Very cool. Dakotah, thank you so much for joining me. I had a blast.
Thank you so much. Likewise.
And to our listeners, if you're still here, well, it's time to subscribe and to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.